Got it. X. True. And let's do this here. Let's do this way. Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. It is Monday evening and it's 8:30. So we are going to get started, jumping right into our 3-step program. We are learning Torah, and of course, the reason we're learning Torah is Hashem told us to do so. And in addition to that, it gives us better footing, better grounding in order to be able to work with whatever life throws at us, brings to us. And as we said, Hashem doesn't let things happen or allow things to happen. Hashem makes things happen, orchestrates, everything goes on. And it's our challenge to be able to rise to what Hashem presents us with. So learning Torah, obviously it connects us with Hashem, but puts us in a better position to be able to make the most of every given situation. So we are starting with our first of 3 steps, which is what's going on this week in the Yiddish calendar. From there, we will jump into what's going on this week in the Parshah, and then we'll look for one practical, relevant life message for this week's Parshah. So, before we go anywhere, if anyone wants to weigh in, or what is special in this week's calendar, what's going on? Anybody? Help me out. You can unmute those who want to. Settings. Okay, I'm going to start talking. If you feel like you want to share anything at any point, please feel free to do so. We are going to start off with the first step that's going on in this week's calendar is that earlier today, we had a very, I'm not sharing, continue sharing, please share. You see, okay. We have a big day on the Chabad calendar. I should say big day as in a very important date, although it's not a very joyous day on the Chabad calendar. In the year 1992, Tov Shin Nun Beis, on this day, Chav Zayin Adar, the 27th of Adar, it was the day that the Rebbe went to the oil. And at the oil, the Rebbe suffered a stroke at the oil. Of course, everybody was frantic, what we could do. And for the next 2 years plus, 2.5 years, people were saying, Tehillim and Davening, doing mitzvahs and enormously. It was the Rebbe suffered another stroke later on the very same day. Chav Zayin Adar was a very difficult day for Chassidim. And not long before that, Gimel Shvat, there was a very powerful sikh. The Rebbe spoke about his father-in-law, almost preempting or at least giving direction for this challenge that we were faced, and until this day we are faced. We haven't heard of a brengen since then. We haven't had sichos or dollars. And the Rebbe spoke about being able to be the mouthpiece of the tzaddik who couldn't talk. Go to the doctor who challenged the previous Rebbe, who was so ill and so sick. And then the doctor asked the Rebbe, how is it that a person like the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, who had done so much with his power of speech, yet the speech was taken away from him. In his later years, he was extremely hard to communicate and to talk. And this was effectively the message that the people, the followers, the generation, the Chassidim, have the task of acting as the mouthpiece for the Rebbe. And in our case, every time we move around and we act and behave in a way that is befitting, that it represents the teachings of the Rebbe, then we're doing exactly that. We don't have the answers to the questions of why, but what we do know is that the Rebbe's guidance and teachings are there to give us direction, and when we can live up to that, that's our response, or at least part of our response to Chav Zayin Adar. A very big day on the calendar, and it's a special time to be able to focus forward. It happens to be that this week, we are also going to mark on Wednesday night and Thursday, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And Rosh Chodesh Nisan, as every Rosh Chodesh, is special. But in the month of Nisan, which is in the very name, Nisan means miracles, and Nisan actually is written with a nun at the end, making it have 2-letter nun, start with a nun and end with a nun. And as the Gemara tells us, someone who sees a Nisan in a dream, the word Nisan refers to not just one miracle, but miracles of miracles, continuous miracles. And if anybody needs a miracle, this is the time. It's Rosh Chodesh Nisan coming up this week. And of course, it's Chodesh HaGeula. It's the month of redemption. As the Gemara in Megillah describes that the month of Nisan is a month of redemption, and therefore if there's a question which month we should celebrate and mark Purim in, first Adar or second Adar, we mark it in the second one because it's closer to Nisan. Nisan is when it's happening, and it's a seasonally goyal b'chedesh Nisan. We don't have to wait till then, but it's certainly the energy of redemption, big time, coming right up. In addition to that, starting from this Thursday, which in itself is Rosh Chodesh, we will not say Tachnon, the confessional prayer. We will keep it in a joyous frame of mind and mode throughout the month of Nisan, because the whole of the month is overturned with goodness, in the sense that the first 12 days of Nisan mark the dates of the inauguration of the Mishkan, which we spent so much time in the parashas reading about the past few weeks. The first day that the Mishkan was properly live was the first day of Nisan. And for the next 12 days, each day another Shevet, another Nasi of a different Shevet, brought the carbon the first 12 days of Nisan, making them extremely important days, especially for each Shevet in its day. But as we read in the back of the Siddur, there's a special Yehirotzin that we say. After reading the carbon of the Nasi, we're bringing the talk about the offerings that the Nasi brought in its day. We read about the connection that date has to the energy of that particular Nasi. And in the Yehirotzin, we say that if I have a connection to such and such a tribe, such and such a Shevet, then all those particular energies should shine forth. And the Zohar tells us that we say this, and everybody says it every day. What about somebody who knows he's not from Shevet Yehuda? What about somebody who knows he's not from Shevet Yosef? Perhaps he's a Kohen or a Levi, and he knows that he's from Shevet Levi. We still, each one of us, say all of the 12 Yehirotzins. And as the Zohar describes in a different area, there's an idea called Ibor, which usually means to become carrying, or to, like a mother carries an unborn fetus. The idea is that one neshama carries energy from a different strand of neshamas, and they interact together. And therefore, even if I'm not from that shevet, my neshama could be affected by the energy of that shevet, and that's the Yehirotzin that we all say. So although we understand that there are different groups or circles within Yiddishkeit as the Torah designates, still we also understand that there's a concept called Ibur, which means that we draw energy off each other, and therefore we all say the Yehirotzins, and makes a choice for everybody. And of course, in addition to the 12 first days of Nisan, you have another 8, or in the Chutz La'aretz, 9 days of Pesach. That's by far the majority of the month, and that the entire month becomes a month that we do not say Tachman. Fantastic. So this is this week. It starts on the Thursday, and we will be mentioning the Nasi each day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It happens to be that this Shabbos, there's no additional readings, there's no additional Torahs, but it's still a very big date, and it's base Nisan, which is the Yom HaStalkos, the day of passing of the Rebbe Rashab, and the day that the previous Rebbe became Rebbe at a very young age, at a very difficult time in Jewish history. It was at the dawn of communist Russia, and that's when the previous Rebbe stepped up on base Nisan to rise to the need and the necessity of the generation, and that's this Shabbos. So in this Shabbos, we'll be marking base Nisan, which is obviously the Yom HaStalkos, the day of the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, and more importantly, the day that the previous Rebbe, the father of Rebbe Tzin Chaim Mishka, became the Rebbe of Chabad movement. So that's what's going on the calendar. What we've got is, we've got Chav Zayin Adar, we've got Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the whole month of Nisan, and we've got base Nisan coming up. There's tremendous goodness going on. And as we said, it's a month of redemption. Miracles, if we ever needed one, now's the time. Let's talk about what's going on in the Parshah. It's Parshas Vayikra. It's the favorite Parshah to those who start to learn Torah. Dora Chana just had a Chumash party, and guess which Parshah she started learning? Parshas Vayikra. That's where children start learning the Torah. Why Yovik Toirim? Those who are pure and in an innocent state in their life come and start learning the Parshah that deals with pure and innocent karbonis that are brought in the base of Mikdash. It starts off with the word Vayikra with a small aleph, and Hashem calls to Moshe. Actually, Hashem called Moshe each time. In this Parshah, Hashem writes it into the Parshah. Hashem calls Moshe, and Moshe comes to the Oyel Moed, which is the brand new Mishkan, and he tells him about the karbonos, the offerings that were brought up. Two important Hasidic small ideas that are bigger than big. And that is number one, the word korban, which means an offering. Actually, the root of that word is karov, to become close. Bringing an offering to Hashem is a gift that Hashem has given to us. He's created a way that we can step up closer to Hashem. How many times do we wish we could be close to somebody who's so powerful, so great, so awesome? And Hashem says, although we are just creations and He is creator, we can become close to our very creator. We can bridge that infinite gap by bringing a gift to Hashem, as long as we're following the recipe Hashem laid out for us. And here are the recipes. Carbon number one is going to be the laws of the olah, the burnt offering. And that's a way that a human being can become close to Hashem. Fascinatingly, the carbon olah is the exception to the rule, which can be brought by everyone, Jews and non-Jews alike, and anyone can bring a carbon olah. You don't have to have a very big reason to bring a carbon olah. And the carbon olah, the complete burnt offering, was burnt on the Mizbech, as its name implies, and the entire offering was burnt to Hashem. It was the exception because all other karbanos generally weren't entirely burnt on the offering on the Mizbech. It was usually the less edible parts of the animal that were burnt on the Mizbech, which we'll learn in a moment. But before we do that, I want to point out one more Hasidic idea. Sha'atzul carbon meaning drawing close. There's another beautiful observation that the Alter Rebbe in Torah points out, points out and says, notice the phraseology. Notice the choice of wording and the order in which the Torah says, Adam ki yakrif mikem karban laHashem, person who brings from amongst you an offering to Hashem. Says the Alter Rebbe, every word in the Torah is exact, and the order in which the words are written are also exact. And instead of writing, if a person from amongst you brings an offering, the Torah chooses to write, if a person brings an offering from amongst you. So the offering comes from amongst us. Says the Alter Rebbe, powerful. Every offering that we bring to Hashem has to be from within, from amongst us. Mikem. And mikem meaning that in order to become close to Hashem, we have an animalistic side. And by using the animalistic side as a gift to Hashem, we're not ignoring it. We're not breaking it. We're transforming it. We're bringing it as a gift to Hashem. Let's just say, as we learned last week about materialism, or somebody has a creative streak, or has something fantastic that they can share, that might usually be associated with self-gratification or self-improvement. And we're learning that the way to bring a gift to Hashem is to use those gifts that we have, or animalistic drives that we have, tendencies, or if we have a certain pull to a certain thing that it might seem animalistic. In this week's parashah, we learn that that's the kind of gift Hashem really wants from us. Of course, we follow the halacha, so we do all the mitzvahs, the do's and the don'ts. But where it really matters is where it's really me. And when it's really me that's connecting to Hashem, mikem, from within, from amongst within me, and that's the real gift and the closeness that is drawn to Hashem. Powerful idea. Short little vart from the Alter Rebbe. So let's jump right into the summary of the parasha. We have the first type of offering we said in the parasha is the olah carbon. The olah carbon is wholly raised to Hashem and is burnt on top of the mizbech in the fire. Second, after that, is the minchos. A mincha is a meal offering or a flour offering. Flour here is spelled F-L-O-U-R rather than W-E-R, because this is flour as in stuff that you bake with, or grain that's turned into flour. And that's the gift that Hashem gives us an option to bring them. There are 5 different recipes that are all kosher for different types of menachos, and they all include flour, oil from olives, and frankincense, which is a special combination. And that's what makes the mincha meal offering. And all of those 5 are listed right after olah. And following that, we learn about a carbon shlamim. Carbon shlamim is known as a peace offering. And the peace offering, again, was partially brought on the mizbeach, partially eaten by the Kohanim, the service men of the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem's team, if you like, and the rest of it, the bulk of the meat was eaten by the owners who brought it to Hashem. And they could share it. And often would. They would make a barbecue, or they would call their friends over. And together, anyone who was in a state of purity would be able to join them in Yerushalayim, would be able to eat the meat of the carbon shlomim. In the times of the Mishkan, so that is while the Jewish people were still traveling in the desert, all meat that was eaten as a carbon shlomim. They wouldn't eat meat otherwise. When they came into Israel, then that was suddenly made changed, and they would be able to eat regular meat. But this sort of idea of eating a carbon, just think about it. Imagine you could eat the Sefer Torah. No one would dream of doing that. But you're eating a piece of holiness. You're eating a piece of a carbon. And that was something that you could do. You would come to the Beis Hamikdash, bring the animal that you brought up, part of it would go into the Mizbeach, part of it would go to the Kohen, and then you would get the meat, and which you would eat and consume, and you are what you eat. Eating and partaking in, and together with your friends and family, an actual meat of a carbon shlomim. A peace offering was brought for many different reasons. One example is the carbon Pesach, which is also a spin-off of a shlomim, and there are a number of other different shlomim that were brought. You didn't have to have a very good excuse to bring a shlomim. Anytime you wanted to, you could. And one of the reasons why it was called a peace offering is because it made peace with everybody. All three parties got a portion of this carbon. Mizbeach got a portion, the Kohanim got a portion, and of course the owner and their team also got themselves a portion. Following the carbon shlomim in the Torah, we read about the different types of carbon chatos, sin offerings. If somebody did an avera, transgression, and then they realized their mistake, they would bring a carbon chatos, an atonement, a sin offering. This and sin offering, they're dependent on who it was who made the mistake. First, the Torah tells us what happens if the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake. Very serious. If the entire community makes a mistake, if the king, the Nasi, made a mistake, and then we learn about what happens to anyone else, an average Jew who makes a mistake. And it's again different levels of a chatos. The last part of the Torah talks about the asham, which is a guilt offering, which is different than a sin offering in the sense that it's not just a regular sin. It's brought for somebody who did a very particular type of transgression, which is unique. Three examples that are listed right here. One is an example of somebody misappropriated, so benefited from the hektish, the stuff that had been donated and belonged to the Beis Hamikdash fund, and something belonged to Kedusha, was supposed to be used only for Hashem, and I used it for myself. God forbid, that would be an asham. Somebody who not sure, unsure, uncertain whether or not they did an avera. Again, it would be more strict and different to somebody who knows I did something wrong, only it was a mistake. But if I don't know, if I'm unsure whether I did the transgression, then I don't get away with it. If anything, I make a double stage atonement. One is whilst I'm unsure, and if I ever found out that I actually did it, then I would then again bring the second carbon. Because when I'm unsure if I did something wrong, I might think, it's not a big deal. The Torah wants us to take into consideration just the mere fact that I might have done something wrong, something important to consider. And of course, the last one is somebody who betrayed Hashem by betraying a fellow human being. If I swore falsely, costing someone else money, and then because I betrayed Hashem through betraying them, then again, that would be a carbon asham, a guilt offering. And that's basically the summary of what the Parshah talks about. Many technical details, but a powerful message all the way through. Human beings, even when they make a mistake, even when they want to reach out, there is always the way to be able to become closer to Hashem. And that's the concept of a carbon, which this Parshah is full of. Okay, we're jumping right in, and we're going to talk about the title for today's class was, is it really a mistake? Certain mistakes happen to certain people. Now, it's a tall claim to make. In general, when we want to make such a claim, we have to be conscious about what we are claiming or not claiming. But the Torah here is telling us that a human being who makes a mistake should also bring a carbon chatos. A carbon means it's going to cost them money. A carbon means that they go out and have to they have to travel up to Yerushalayim, bring the carbon with them. And here we have the opening pasuk of the discussion of karbonos of chatos. And again, we said that the parasha is generally technical, but of course, there's a tremendous amount of meaning in each one of these halachas, and we're focusing on the general concept of a sin offering. Sin offering is if I made a mistake, I realize I made a mistake, I can still connect, I can still come closer to Hashem. There's a way, there's a path. This particular reading, we're going to read it together, is from the psukim that deal with one of the first, the earlier, second one actually, second carbon chatos. We said there was 4 types. And here's the reading. Says the pasuk in Kol Adas Yisrael Yishku. What happens if the entire community of Israel errs? They all make the same mistake. And the reason they make the mistake, says the pasuk, because a matter was hidden from the eyes of the congregation of the Sanhedrin. And they commit one of the commandments of Hashem that may not be committed, incurring guilt. It's a terrible thing. Everyone's done the Avera, but they've all done it. When the sin that they had committed becomes known, the congregation, the Kehillah, shall bring a young bull as a sin offering. And they shall bring it before the tent of meeting, the Oyel Mayit. Pasuk Chaf, he shall do to the bull just as he did to the bull of the sin offering. Thus he shall do to it. Thus the Kohen shall make atonement for them, the community, and they will be forgiven. And he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it just as he burnt the first bull. It's a sin offering for the congregation. Fascinating. So this psukim are a little bit cryptic. We're going to read how the Rambam explains the actual storyline of what happens and why they had to do this. This is how the Rambam puts in halacha the psukim that were packed and now have been unpacked. Here we go. Say the High Court inadvertently erred in a ruling and ruled that a forbidden substance is permitted. Let's just say they decided that a certain unkosher product is kosher. And then, as a result of their ruling, the people erred inadvertently and acted in transgression of the prohibition while relying on the ruling of the Beis Din. Now, thereafter, the Beis Din discovers that they erred, they made a mistake. In such a case, the court is obligated to bring a sin offering for the erroneous ruling. And this is true even if the judge themselves did not perform a deed of violation of prohibition. They didn't eat it. They did nothing wrong in action. They must bring the sacrifice, for we do not consider the deeds of the judges at all, what they did or did not do, only their ruling. Because they paskin and they made the halacha. So instead of looking at whether they acted in transgression of the mitzvah, if they acted the Avera or not, we don't care about that. The sin offering they're bringing isn't for the action of them, it's for their psak din, for their halachic ruling over which everyone else acted, and that's why they will bring the carbon. The people are exempt from bringing in the carbon as individuals, even though they performed the transgression because they relied on the Beis Din. They don't have to bring a carbon, the Beis Din does. Which sacrifice do they bring for this erroneous ruling? Says the Rambam, every shevet must bring a bull as a sin offering. This offering is mentioned in the pasuk of our Parshah that we just read. And if the entire community of Yisrael inadvertently errs, each one of the bulls is called a bull brought due to a lapse awareness of the congregation. Par, Helem, Davar, Shel, Tzibur. As the pasuk says, and the Tzibur shall offer. Every congregation means every tribe is referred to as a congregation. And here we have the fascinating halacha. The Sanhedrin paskind that chelev or something is kosher. Actually, it was a mistake. All the people didn't know it was a mistake and followed their ruling. People don't have to bring a carbon. The Sanhedrin does. Each shevet brings a carbon on behalf of the Sanhedrin for the mistake that they made. Even if the Sanhedrin did nothing, no action that is wrong. Now, here is the first observation. What is the reason why a carbon chatos is ever brought? Why would the Torah tell us, if I've done something wrong, get the animal on the mizbeach? What's the animal got to do with it? And how's it going to help my wrongdoing? So according to almost all the Mefarshim, they explain that the concept of bringing a carbon isn't just push the button and you'll be okay. It's a way of making the human being experience a journey of return. So it's a very visual, and if you were in the base of the Mikdash, you'd actually put your hands on the carbon, feel the warmth of the animal's life, and actually watch the animal be shechted and skinned. And that would be part of almost like a meditation that would allow the person to experience the remorse and the change, thinking, this is in exchange for me. And this is the carbon I am bringing as a gift to Hashem instead of my own self. Thank you, Hashem, for a new lease, for a new opportunity. But the visual, the experience, the smell, the feeling of being able to see this animal go up instead of me, that is the process of a carbon. Let's read how the Ramban writes it. The Ramban writes, a person must think throughout the process of bringing the sin offering that they have sinned before Hashem with their body. And really, it is their blood and their body that ought to be spilled and burnt on the altar. It's only out of Hashem's kindness He accepts the sacrifice in the sinner's place. Okay, that kind of explains it. It helps us wrap our mind around why someone would have to bring a carbon. But here is how the Sikha builds the question based on what we've just said. We've just explained that the concept of a carbon is that if I've done something wrong, I want to put myself through the journey of coming back and experience that, and therefore that each congregation would have to bring a carbon. The question is, why is the Shevet, the community, the people, bringing a sin offering when it turns out that it was the Sanhedrin's mistake? What did the community do wrong? How can we even consider the people in the wrong here, where at the end of the day, they just followed the Psak Din? Or if you want to make it more Talmudic, what does the Torah tell the average Jew to do? It says follow the Beis Din. And if the Beis Din is unsure, follow the majority in the Beis Din. So any Jew who consumed or ate or partook in whatever the Beis Din said is permissible, they follow the directions that they were supposed to by the law of the Torah itself. And how can we hold such a community accountable in the slightest? Shouldn't the Sanhedrin themselves be the only ones culpable, and the Sanhedrin should be the ones bringing the carbon, not the community? It's true that the individuals aren't bringing the carbon, but that only strengthens the question. If the individuals don't have to, why is the community or the Shevet in each one held accountable to this level at all? Shouldn't it all be in the hands of the Sanhedrin because it was their mistake and we only followed orders the way we were supposed to? And this is why the first question of the Sikh is going to be something about this Parsha is telling us a message. Because if it were down to us, if we were to be making up the halachas on our own, we should be leaning towards saying, it's not my mistake, it's the Beis Din's fault. Let the Beis Din deal with the mess. If the Beis Din said a chicken is kosher and I ate it, I don't feel right. At the end of the day, it was the Beis Din's fault. They should feel bad. I go to sleep at night. For some reason, it's not quite the same. The Pasuk saying, yes, indeed, you're not held entirely accountable. There's something in there. It's on the community's shoulders, and we're asking, what is that, or why is that? And more importantly, what is it telling us with this halacha? That's going to be our first question. In order to answer this question, the Sikha finds the answer to this question in another observation, which we're going to focus on, and the two of them will help us appreciate some fascinating insights that Chassidus makes a big deal out of, but also is very practical. Let's move right into it, and that's going to be by focusing on the Nasi. The Nasi, in this context, which means the prince, usually, actually means the leader. Generally speaking, that was the Jewish king. When there was a king, the king was the Nasi. Fascinatingly, there's a very interesting quote from the Rebbe in a letter to the second president in Eretz Yisrael, in the state of Israel, in which he writes him a letter. It was in the very early years. And he writes to him the letter without addressing him. So the lesson, usually the Rebbe's letter says, to so-and-so, with all the titles, this, that, and the other, and goes right into the letter. This letter to the president started without any intro, without any addressing the recipient. And at the end of the letter, the Rebbe writes a footnote. And it says, I didn't address you with your proper address because it's hard for me to use the title Nasi for anyone other than Mashiach, who will be the king, because I don't want to address you without saying Nasi, because that would be disrespectful to you and your position. But at the same time, for me, and here's the famous quote the Rebbe says, already from when I was first went to school, to Cheder, and before, I've always and already been dreaming of what the world will look like with the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt. And therefore, to use the title Nasi for yourself, if anyone other than Mashiach, is very hard for me. And that's how the Rebbe used the word Nasi. Interestingly, the Rebbe didn't have a hard time using the word president and called people president. But the word Nasi, I mean, in Hebrew, the word president is translated as Nasi. But in the context of when we talk about the Nasi Sheb Yisrael, that's a reference to the king. And of course, nowadays, the Nasi will be King Mashiach, which is the main job description of Mashiach. You find the laws of Mashiach in the laws of kings, because that's what Mashiach's main job will be, to restore the Davidic dynasty, to restore kingship among you. But in this parasha, we have exactly that. We have Asher Nasi Yachta. When the Nasi makes a mistake, he too must bring a unique sacrifice to atone for his inadvertent sin. That is the next set of halachas, the next mitzvah of karbanos. So we've spoken about the idea of the communal sin, when the whole community follows the Sanhedrin ruling and made a mistake. And we ask the question, why should the community have to bring a carbon if it was the rabbi's mistake? The Sanhedrin made the mistake and we just follow the Sanhedrin. We've got to question, why are we being dragged in to make the carbon? We're now focusing on the next few psukim that deal with what happens Asher Nasi Yechta, when the king makes a mistake. Okay. Now, let's read the pasuk the way it's inside. Says the pasuk in pasuk Chav Beis, if a leader of Israel, the Nasi, sins Yechta and unintentionally commits one of all the commandments of Hashem, which may not be committed, incurring guilt, says pasuk Chav Gimel, if his sin that he has committed is made known to him, then he shall bring his offering, an unblemished male goat. I'm going to ask you to notice the very first word in the Hebrew of the two psukim we just read. Chav Beis says, Asher Nasi Yechta v'asa Achim Kol Mitzvahs. That first word, Asher Nasi Yechta, becomes the point of a commentary of the Rashi. And Rashi says, Asher is an interesting way of saying if. Asher actually means that. It's not a great, smooth reading, but obviously the Torah is telling us without that word. Says Rashi, if a leader of Israel sins, why does the pasuk not use the word im, like in the case of the previous verse of 3 and 13 above? The answer is that Asher is an expression reminiscent of the dictum of the expression starting the word Ashrei. Asher miloshin Ashrei, which means fortunate. And here Rashi says fortunate is, namely, fortunate is the generation whose leader gives attention to bringing an atonement offering for his unintentional sins. And how much more so will he experience remorse for the sins he has committed willfully? This, says Rashi, is why the pasuk chooses to use the word Asher Nasi Yechta, because it's not just if the prince, the king, the leader brings it an atonement for his mistake. It's a lucky generation. Here is the question of the Nasi fortune that the pasuk says. The Asich has the following two questions. What exactly is the fortune of the generation whose leader offers such a sacrifice? Wouldn't it be better, more fortunate, if we had a leader that doesn't make mistakes? Like, why are we so fortunate to have a leader that offers a sacrifice for his mistakes? Number two, why add the extra bit about being inspired, giving attention to offer the sacrifice? What's the bit about the attention bit? Fortunate is the generation whose leader gives attention to bring an atonement, gives attention. Fortunate is the generation whose leader brings an offering or atonements for his mistakes. 2 points. the Sikha wants us to notice. And of course, the reason we're asking these questions are because we've got very good answers that are telling. They talk to us, to our commitment and our avodah in life. So these are our two questions. What we'll do next is that we have a basic answer, a straightforward answer that some of Parshah want to give, and the Sikha is going to say we want more. So the basic answer is, if the leadership isn't too proud and is able to be honest and to be able to say, if I made a mistake, I need to correct my ways, that's a great example. That's a great role model. That's a role model of not just somebody who's getting it all right. That's a role model of somebody who's willing to own up and to mend their ways. That's a lucky generation. Because if the leadership is doing that, then the followership will be more inclined to be able to become better, to improve, to be honest. And that is very important. We don't look for leaders that are invincible or leaders that are perfect, because that's not a real role model. A real role model isn't someone who always gets it right. A real role model is somebody who's willing to be honest, to own up, and to atone, to mend their ways. Fantastic idea. And that's Ashrei, a very fortunate generation, that the prince, the leader, the king, is willing to mend their ways. However, says the Sikha, it's a great lesson. It's very important. It's important to notice this. But, what's the but? And the but is that actually we've already spoken about other leaders and we didn't use the word Ashrei. Which other leaders have already come in the Parashah? The Kohen Gadol, the high priest. The Kohen Gadol actually was mentioned earlier, and it doesn't say Asher, it says if. If the anointed Kohen brings sins, bringing guilt to the people, then he shall bring for a sin that he has committed an unadamish young bull as a sin offering to Hashem. More than that, the Torah actually made the Kohen Gadol bring his carbon in a uniquely different way that should attract more attention in order to drive this message home. That when the Kohen Gadol is bringing a sin offering, everybody should know, even holiest man, Kohen Gadol himself, can make mistakes and is not too embarrassed or too proud to be able to mend his ways. What would they do uniquely different? How would they promote this? How would they advertise the Kohen Gadol is bringing a sin offering? Says Pasuk Yud Beis, he shall take the entire bull to a pure place outside the camp. He has to go and burn his offering outside Yerushalayim. Everybody's going to go, what's going on? The Kohen Gadol is walking his animal, his carbon outside Yerushalayim. Yeah, it's a sin offering. The Kohen Gadol is amending his ways for something that he made a mistake about. Oh, really? The Kohen Gadol wasn't too embarrassed? He wasn't too proud to say he made a mistake? Oh, wow. Everybody's talking about this. It's not even being burnt on the Mizbeach. It's going to be burnt outside the camp, namely to the ash depository, and you shall burn it on fire and wood, lest it shall be burnt in the ash depository. So we have this idea of a Kohen Gadol teaching the people that it's okay to be able to own up. It's a good idea to mend our ways, not to be too proud. So something else is being told to us when we learn about the king, the Nasi. Another message. And it's this message that has the terminology fortunate generation. Wow, this is special. What's more special than leadership that's willing to own up and be honest and to lead by example, teaching, being role models, to be able to mend our ways? What could be more fortunate than that? And that's what we're looking for in the Sikha. And the answer to this question will answer our previous question as to why the Sanhedrin, or who made a mistake, are causing us to pay the price and to bring our own carbon. It's a little subtle idea, but it's so brilliant. It's so good. It helps us appreciate the entire idea of right and wrong, the entire idea of mistakes, mending our ways. What's this about? Here it goes. Here we have a quote from the Barbanel. Torah wished to publicize as an offering, explaining the high priest, the great scholar, and teaching the nation. That's why, to maximize publicity, Hashem instructed the sacrifice be burnt outside the camp, so the people should realize that the Kohen Gadol, the community, had sinned, and they would return to Hashem and secure atonement, just like the Kohen Gadol did. Okay. Generally speaking, there were three major sin offerings. One was the Kohen Gadol, one was the communal sin offering, and one was a sin offering of the Nasi. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to do what I shouldn't do, and I'm going to say the entire answer first, and afterwards we'll build it up. Just because it's subtle, and I'd rather we understand it than we get a surprise or surprise factor at the end. This is great. It's fantastic how the Sikha builds us up, and the Sikha tells us that these three major types of carbon chatos are building up so that we can better understand what it means to make amends. Why should a person who's done something wrong want to fix their ways in the first place? So the first thing we learned was the Kohen Gadol, and as we said, the Kohen Gadol had a unique process in which he would advertise and market and let people know that even holiest man of all, Kohen Gadol himself, is human, is absolutely human, and therefore can make mistakes, and therefore anyone else who claims to be human should be comfortable owning up, making amends, and rectifying, seek atonement, and become close to Hashem. That's level one. And then we learn that actually there's an interesting, strange thing. The carbon chatos that the community brings for a mistake of somebody else. And it's almost as if the Parshah ends off with a question mark. Why? The community brings an offering for a mistake that wasn't theirs. The Sanhedrin, the Beis Din, made the mistake. We only followed their orders, and we're bringing the carbon chatos. Almost like, what's that about? And the answer is the third carbon chatos, the king. And with that opening word, ashrei, asher, which means fortunate in this context, is the key to understanding why we would bring a carbon and a better appreciation of what it means to find atonement. Where are we going with this? If I did something wrong, what emotions should I have? I realize I regret what I have. Well, that's already an emotion. I realize that I've done something wrong. I realize that my choice was a bad choice. There's no one else to blame. It's only me. I didn't intentionally do it, but it was my choice. How should I feel? What is the usual feeling? And what might be the commendable feeling? Anyone want to weigh on this? I realize I've done something wrong. You read the screen, you got the answer. But I'm asking you how you think. What would you say would be a commendable feeling or a natural feeling to a realization that I've done something wrong? Help me out.
Maybe feel distraught.
Distraught. Unsure. How do I proceed? Okay, uncertain. Anyone? Any other words that describe a feeling that's likely to occur or a commendable feeling that should follow the realization? I'm going to say that the word guilt. Sorry? Yeah, feel free to weigh in at any time. The word guilt is often associated with Jewish guilt. And I want to say that usually Jewish guilt is nothing Jewish about it. Because feeling guilty in itself, more often than not, is directly associated with the Yetzer Hara. And this is something the Alter Rebbe makes a big deal out of in Tanya. Feeling guilty for something I did wrong, unless it's going to help me be more productive, is definitely going to help me be less productive. That's just how we're wired. Says Alter Rebbe, one of the key things to guilt is that I decide when I allow myself to entertain those feelings. I have a start time, I have an end time, and I stay in control of the start time and the end time. And the net result, the conclusion of that guilt feeling is empowerment. And that's Rebbe goes as far as not only in being feeling empowered with the ability to atone, it's joy. So if guilt isn't leading me to a joyous feeling, and the greatness of Hashem, the kindness of Hashem for giving us a path back, then that guilt is definitely not pure. It's not holy. It's not ideal. It's not righteous. It doesn't mean it's easy to get rid of the feelings of guilt. But Jewish guilt We stay in control of its start time. We stay in control of its end time. And we control what the conclusion will be. And conclusion will be joy and gratitude to Hashem's kindness for allowing us a path back. But let's talk about the different feelings, not guilt. Here we have, someone said the word distraught, and we're going to use the word bothered. I'm bothered by the fact that I regret it in the sense that I'm bothered. How come I did that? Or I'm bothered by the fact that I did do that. Says Chassidus, don't be bothered by the fact that I'm now going to have to pay the price and it's going to cost me, whether in this world or in the world to come, physically or spiritually, because that's really shallow. That's really starter's level. A mature approach would be the ability to feel a deeper approach would be I'm bothered that I did something that was contrary to the will of Hashem. If I did something that contradicts Hashem's will, that's what I'm bothered about. How could I allow myself to do what Hashem says not to do? Or to miss out and not do what Hashem said yes to do? And that's what it means to feel remorse. Not remorse that it's going to cost me, but remorse that I went contrary to Hashem's desire. Now that is subtle. Now Rambam says in Halacha, one shouldn't feel bad about, have fear of sin because I did something that's going to cost me. We're going to get punished in the world to come, in this world, cut off. The problem is that I have disobeyed Hashem himself. If I think about what a sin is, that in itself is what it is. So not fear of punishment, but fear of the actual commandment. Fascinatingly, here's an interesting thing. Where's it gone? From the Baal Shem Tov. An earthly king does not need to command people to fear him. You see the king, and fear is there. Says the Baal Shem Tov, think about it. Hashem doesn't need to command us to fear him because otherwise he can punish him. Just look around. Hashem is in control of everything. So fear of punishment doesn't need to be told us to do. So why does Hashem give us a command called Yiras Hashem? If Yiras Hashem meant Yiras Ha'onesh, fear of punishment, that doesn't need a command. That's natural. That's instinctive. People naturally fear punishments of death or suffering. So what is the commandment of fear? The commandment of fear is to recognize that if I've done something wrong, then I've disobeyed Hashem. It's almost like, this is the mashal that they use, that people say, I don't want to get sick because I can't stand taking the medicine. That's not a reason to not get sick. I don't want to get sick because I don't want to be sick. So fearing the medicine instead of fearing the sickness is, of course, the difference between fearing the punishment, which is a cleansing process, a medicine, to something that I've done wrong, to compare to being able to steer clear, being bothered by the idea itself of disobeying Hashem. And here's where it becomes a little nuanced. The next step is that we have to, let's do a normal text. Let's just see this inside in the Sikha. This is, I'm sorry, it's from the Tzemach Tzedek. Person should understand and appreciate how much they ought to run away from an Avera. Avoid touching it with a 10-foot pole. More than fearing the punishment of a sin, a person ought to fear sin itself. For the punishment is actually a cure for sin. How then does it make sense to be afraid of the cure and not the malady itself? Accordingly, fear of punishment is really a primitive, basic level. For it's like someone who is afraid of the cure, not the malady, which is understandably primitive. The main thing a person ought to fear is the sin itself, which is infinitely more evil and bitter than the punishment to turn down Hashem. So now, we're going to focus on the difference between young me, primitive me, who fears getting into trouble or having to pay the price for doing the wrong thing, compared to advanced or matured or Yiddishkeit Yira or Hasidic Yira, Yiras Hashem, which is I don't want to let Hashem down. I don't want Hashem's world to run contrary to what Hashem has asked me to do. It's the difference between the fear of getting caught, the fear of being told that I'm wrong, versus the fear of the impact of what happens if I did something wrong. If I've caused something to short circuit, to blow, to shut down, to disconnect, then I don't want that to happen. I'm going to do everything I can to restore the mess that I make. That's a one more advanced, better type of Yiras Hashem. The more primitive, basic type of Yira, the Yiras Ha'onesh, isn't about the impact, it's about what's going to happen, the culpability. Will I be held accountable or not? Is it going to become my fault and therefore will I have to pay the price? And that's the more primitive level. So we're going to say culpability, so accountable, meaning will I be punished? Versus what's the impact of my action? Understanding this difference will help us better appreciate just how much a korban does for us. Let's use this difference. The basic Yiras Chet, which is Yiras Ha'onesh, fear of getting caught, being held culpable, versus Yiras Chet, which means fear of letting Hashem down. I don't want to cause a bad impact, and I steer clear of that, which is a much more advanced level. So here is the way the Alter Rebbe writes it in the Kutei Torah. The true definition of fear of sin is to fear sin itself, which is more bitter than death. Just as the soul climbs higher when a mitzvah is performed, so it is to the contrary with evil. Sin drags the soul far, far away from Hashem to the extent that the harsh judgment is meted out to the sinner, which is like a cure for him because it's the only way to drag and bring back, rectify the bad impact. So it's not the fear of the punishment, it's the fear of the impact, the bad impact. And this itself should inspire great fear of sin in a person's heart. I don't want to cause that sort of mess to take place. So let's now use what we've learned to answer our questions one by one. Let's talk about why the Nasi is the one who teaches us and brings us the message of a fortunate generation, much more so than Kohen Gadol. And remember, we also mentioned that the Nasi didn't just bring the offering. We had the word, he noticed, he paid attention to what he's done, and therefore wants to bring the offering. He paid attention to what he's done. He didn't just get rid of the punishment. He didn't just atone and find kapara so that he wouldn't get hurt or have to pay the price. He paid attention. He noticed what happened because of his mistake, and he wants to fix the impact of his mistake. This, the Nasi can teach us much more so than the Kohen Gadol. Why would the Nasi, the king, be able to teach us this more than the Kohen Gadol? And this is going to be the key. When the rabbi, when the carbon bringer, the atonement maker, the person's involved in rectifying and helping people atone for the mistakes, gets up and brings a carbon, this is what he does. This is the line of work he's into. And so he's doing it here again. Mr. Kohen Gadol, who is the chief atonement maker, leader, that's what he does. Of course, he's going to, just like he wipes and helps people clean up their own mess, he's going to clean up his mess too. The Nasi is a different type of character. The Nasi is the person who runs the country, the most down-to-earth person, the person who understands the ins and outs of regular and real life. And he understands how the world operates. He runs the country. He understands the subjects of his land. He understands how the politics work. He understands how the economy works. This is a real earthly person. And when the Nasi pays attention, so that even though he's made a mistake, he could get away with it, let's say, but he notices the impact. And the impact isn't just the price he's going to pay. The impact is that he was in a compromised position. He realizes the impact that his mistake will have, not just on how much he'll have to pay, but what it'll have on the entire country and the people around him, and of course himself in his personal relationship with Hashem. He pays attention to that. It's not his line of work. It's not what he's there to do, but he notices and he cares. Not only about the fact that he did something wrong, but the fact of when something was wrong was caused, the impact, it's something he will take into account. Let's read it inside. When the Kohen Gadol doesn't have Vayikra, it's the fault of the people, for they depend on him to atone for them and pray for them, and now he has become impaired. Everyone wants to make sure the Kohen Gadol is doing his teshuvah. But the Nasi is a regular person. When this person brings a carbon, the lesson learned by the people isn't just, look, the role models owning up. It's much more than that. This isn't about making sure that I atone for my wrongdoings. This is a lesson to care, to want to find atonement, not just to not be embarrassed, but to be able to put myself into a place where I actually take notice. It matters to me if Hashem's will is being carried out or not. That's a deeper lesson still. The Kohen Gadol teaches us the lesson of the role model who's not too proud to own up. The Nasi teaches us a deeper lesson still. Even though it was a mistake, I still care. Even though I can't be held fully accountable because it wasn't my fault, but the impact is still there. And the Nasi notices that. And although it's not his line of work, he makes sure to let us know that he's going to bring a carbon because he cares enough to own up. He cares enough to notice the impact that he's making. The Nasi teaches us something that the Kohen Gadol couldn't. And that lesson, so powerful. So powerful. What I need to notice, be involved in, care about, isn't just about whether I'll get caught or not. Whether I'll be held accountable or not. Was it my fault? Was it not my fault? That's level one. We learned that from the Kohen Gadol. The Nasi, Asher, fortunate generation that can learn this message. That it's not just about whether I got caught. It's about whether the entire world is being brought up, elevated, or chas v'shalom being dragged down. And if it was dragged down, I care about, I pay attention to, this is what I want. I want to be able to rectify something, even if I didn't have to. That explains the answer to the first question that we had. Why would the community bring a carbon if it was the fault of the Sanhedrin? It was the Sanhedrin's mistake. Why would the community bring a carbon? And the answer is because the Nasi Yechta teaches us this. That it's not only about whether I am held accountable and culpable or not. It's about whether I care for the impact of what my good or not good decisions make. What a fortunate generation to have this sort of leadership, this sort of teaching, this sort of Nasi. And this is the quote from the Sikha. This is the difference between the sacrifice of the Kohen Gadol and of the king, the Nasi. The Kohen Gadol's role is to offer sacrifices and achieve return for the Jewish people. As such, even when the people would see him bringing a Koran, it would not really inspire them and teach them the lesson of avoiding sin to begin with. Instead, it primarily evoked typical feelings. But when a person commits an inadvertent sin, they should be ashamed. They should bring a carbon for their mistake. They should own up. They should have remorse. But to steer clear of a sin from before it happened, then you haven't necessarily learned that. By contrast, says the Sikha, the king's primary role was to lead the nation in an administrative sense. He was an earthly person. He was a regular street person, a very dehoibin one. So when such a leader would go ahead and bring a sin offering, and what's more, he gives attention to bringing an atonement offering for his unintentional sins, teaches everyone the gravity, not of the punishment of sin, but the gravity of the sin itself. It went again to Hashem once. The impact. This teaches the people to avoid sinning in the first place. Hence, Ashrei, fortunate is this nation. Now it's interesting. A generation with a leader like this is truly lucky. A people who are taught this lesson will inevitably wind up committing fewer sins, contributing to an increasing cycle of just doing the right thing. Fascinating insight, says Chassidus. Think about it for a minute. mistakes. Mistakes happen. But certain mistakes we don't make. Up until this day of my life, I've never by mistake walked out the house without shoes on, without trousers on. It's not one of the mistakes you make. I never forgot to put my shoes on when I'm walking out the door. I didn't. Maybe I didn't have time, but it's not because I forgot to wear shoes that I walked out. It's just not one of the things I make. Or maybe, whatever. I never forgot to, whatever. Some things are extremely beyond the pale. We don't make that mistakes. And this tells us something about the mistakes that we're making. It's not only about whether I have to rectify a mistake. I want to position myself in a place that certain things are so off the charts. They're so distant, they're so repulsive for it to happen that I wouldn't even allow myself to make that mistake. Because in Yiddishkeit, mistakes also, I have a certain level of responsibility for the mistake. This is what the Nasi teaches us. That when I realize who I am, my choices have real impact. I care about that impact. And when I do, I have a lucky, fortunate, uplifted reality. And this is a generation of Ashrei, message from the Nasi, from a regular person who understands real life and equally appreciates the impact that we have. Hashem should give us the koyach. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we can recognize the power in our choices. It's the month of Nisei Nisan, of miracles. It's the month of redemption. And of course, this Shabbos is based Nisan. Friedrich Rebbe became Rebbe. It's the Istalkus of the Rebbe Rashab. And Hashem should give us all the ability to be able to storm forward and have all the brachas that we need. A big shout out again to Rebbe Michal and Leah Cohen. Thank you very much for sponsoring the lesson and for the content that we're just learning. Wishing everybody a good Rosh Chodesh, a good week ahead, and looking forward to seeing you again, same time, same place next week for Ezra Hashem. Thank you very much.